Good afternoon. Today's Battle Rhythm Ending Suicide is a team effort. Will be hosted by Jeanette Gillis. Jeanette is the Deputy Director of the network at America's Warrior Partnership. The network provides local veteran serving organizations with a connection to national resources when a veteran's request cannot be met locally. To find out more about the network, visit AWP, AmericasWarriorPartnership.org/the network. That's it for me, Jeanette. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to September's Battle Rhythm. I'd like to extend a special welcome to all of our affiliate communities, 4-Star Alliance members, veteran service organizations, and any other guests that have joined us today. I'd also like to welcome our panelists here. Today, we have a panel of experts to provide insights and information about how they and their organizations are working together to end veterans' death by suicide. We have Charles Eastman, Director of Strategic Partnerships, Jennifer Keeling, Donor Engagement Manager, and they are both with Black Box Project Stop Soldier Suicide. We have Carla Patton. She is the Senior Director of Postvention Programs for the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors. And we're also joined by our moderator, Cheree Tham, Vice President of Programs and Initiatives here at America's Warrior Partnership. After learning from our panelists, we're going to go into breakout rooms for more discussion of the topic. Today's session will conclude at 3:15. Please feel free to add questions and thoughts in the chat box throughout the session. We will address the questions during the panel and at the end of the panel session if time allows. And now I'm going to pass this over to today's moderator, Cheree. Cheree, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeanette. And thank all of you who are watching today. We're going to have quite a special treat. Our organizations have been working together around prevention for suicide in different capacities, and we thought it would be very good to just show you what we're all working on and how we work together in the supported and united front that we're taking to end veteran suicide. So I want to start with Jennifer. Jennifer, as Jeanette said, you were Stop Soldier Suicide, and you're working on Operation Black Box. Would you tell our viewers a little bit about Operation Black Box and what you guys are doing?
Sure. Thanks for having me, and welcome everyone. So we at Stop Soldier Suicide have created a new and innovative project called the Black Box Project. And essentially what we're doing is looking at devices of those, unfortunately, who have already died by suicide. So a veteran or service member, looking at their digital devices. So cell phone, iPad, laptop, hard drive, any digital device that they had in their possession. We are able to use our software and retrace their digital footprint for the last year of their life. And essentially what we're hoping is that we will start seeing trends, commonalities, just identifiers that we may not have seen before, because, what do we all have on us? We have our devices, right? So those devices hold invaluable information. And so we're really hoping to get a deeper insight into what was going on and hopefully take that information and use it in our prevention efforts.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. Now, for our viewers, can you tell them how long you've been working on Operation Black Box?
Yeah, sure. So I came on board with Stop Soldier Suicide almost a year ago, and have been working specifically with the Black Box Project since that time. And just a little background about myself, I have been working in the suicide pre and postvention space for 9 years now, but I am also a suicide loss survivor myself. I lost my husband in 2009 to suicide. He had 19 years in and was 1 year away from retirement. So it's it's a personal mission of mine, but working on the Black Box project has enabled me to work with suicide loss family members and then also work in the prevention space. So taking what we've been through, which is tragic and just so difficult, but then being able to take that and use it to hopefully help another family from having to go through what we have been through. And that's my mission.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. And for you guys, for the breakout, Jennifer is going to talk a lot about post-traumatic growth through the experience of loss by suicide. So you may want to check out that breakout session. So, and I get confused with my years with COVID, but it was the first time that we did our virtual symposium with America's Warrior Partnership that was 100% virtual. And I got a note when we were talking about Operation Deep Dive that said, isn't Operation Deep Dive the same thing as Operation Black Box? And I was like, I don't know what this is. So Chuck and I get on the phone and I said, Chuck, are we doing the same thing that Stop Soldier Suicide is doing? And he's like, no, I don't think so. And that is where our relationship started and has become so complementary. So with that being said, Chuck, can you give a little bit about a background around that and how we're working together, and as well as about Stop Soldier Suicide and the other phenomenal work that you guys are doing?
Absolutely. And thanks so much for having us on today. It's a real pleasure. So like Cheree said, going back to, just to highlight a little bit on Black Box, going back to early 2020 when I first came on board, I heard some of the Stop Soldier Suicide leadership talking about this, pie in the sky idea of this technology that could intervene and develop patterns of life. And I'm an aviator by trade from the Army. So to my mind, it sounded like a black box on an airplane. So a black box on an airplane is a cockpit voice recorder and a flight data recorder that records the last 30 minutes of voice and the last hour or more of, position of flight controls, altitude, atmospherics. And they're able to take that data and recreate a crash, because prior to the 1950s, if there was an aircraft accident and everybody on board perished, unless there was a witness that saw it happen, you're at the mercy of the aircraft investigator or accident investigator to try to put it back together to the best of their ability. And that was just, depending on how much was left of the accident. And it was kind of a best guess. And then the black box was developed, and we were suddenly able to get so much more information about aviation accidents and to recreate them and to figure out what were the causal factors that led up to the accident. Because like in aviation accidents, there's no like one single cause that usually, leads to an accident. It's usually a series of events, whether it be, human decisions or weather or mechanical, and it all ultimately, unfortunately, leads up to an accident. So I was really intrigued by the Black Box project. And when I started, trying to reach out and, build my network, kind of early in the lockdown, I learned about Operation Deep Dive. And I started to question myself. I'm like, well, how is this any different? So the first conversation I had with Cheree, it was exciting because like she said, it was so complimentary, because we are dealing with families. Jennifer is dealing with the families that, may have devices, whereas Cheree and Operation Deep Dive are dealing with families that may not have a device or may not want to give up a device. And then to kind of further separate them a little bit, the techniques for gathering the information are different. So, I won't steal Cheree's thunder, but, Operation Deep Dive, they do pretty much what we would consider a psych autopsy of a traditional interview process. And from Black Box, we don't actually interview any person. We extract the data from the phone, we upload it into a data lake, and then AWS utilizes their machine learning and AI to hopefully recreate the final seconds, minutes, and months of this person's life. So there's no bias involved. It's strictly data, and it's strictly machine learning. And we don't think that, and we don't say in any way that what we're learning is going to prevent suicide or eliminate suicide. But what we hope is going to happen is that it's going to be a perspective into somebody's life that led up to a suicide that nobody's looked at before. Even through the psych autopsies and the interviews, this is going to be the veteran that died. This is really their inward facing persona. This is what they didn't want their loved ones to know, what they didn't want their families to know, what they may have been ashamed of, what they may have been embarrassed about, what websites were they going to, what apps were they using, what social media were they on. So there's a whole new insight into what they're doing that we haven't explored before. And it's really perfect because Jennifer sometimes will encounter families that want to help, because that's kind of the universal theme that we've met with these surviving families, is they want to help. But Jennifer may meet a family that doesn't have a device. So Jennifer is able to refer them over to Cheree and her team. And then vice versa, if Cheree encounters a family that has a device, but they don't want to go through the interview process, then they can refer them over to us and we can borrow the device, and then our forensics team can do their magic from there. So it was kind of like a perfect meeting of the minds. They were able to bring our organizations together. So it's a really exciting technology and opportunity, and just really thankful to be here today to talk about it.
Great, thank you, Chuck. I learned an interesting, I was on a conference last week or the week before, and I learned an interesting statistic, and you were talking about how you came up with the name with Operation Black Box. Historically, what I come to find out, historically, we have said that when someone dies by suicide, that 6 people are affected by that death of suicide. And I found out that where that came from was when an airplane crashes and there are members on the airplane and they lose their life in the flight, that there are 6 people affected around that airplane. And there was no research or evidence to support this, but they applied that to suicide and the impact that is on loved ones and family members. When in fact now there's been research that indicates that it's actually north of, well, on or around 134, 135. Okay, Melissa's shaking her head, so I'm getting the number right. 135 persons exposed to the death of that person, and which is a huge impact when you start thinking about the fiber and the community and what that entails for from those of us that knew and loved that person. You also hit on a lot about psychological autopsies, Chuck, and if anyone is an expert on psychological autopsies, it's going to be TAPS. TAPS has done a lot of work in psychological autopsies, and I might be overstepping, Carla, but I think it's probably impacted a lot of your programs from what you've obtained in that, in doing those psychological autopsies. So please tell our viewers a little bit about TAPS and the programs that you guys are doing.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me and addressing these topics. As you mentioned, I with TAPS, Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, where I oversee our suicide prevention and postvention programs. By trade, I am a clinician, and I specialize in the subject areas around suicide and trauma and bereavement. But all of that really happened because of my personal loss, having lost my spouse in the early 90s. He was a Marine at the time, active duty from the Gulf War era. And he died by suicide at the age of 24, and we were expecting our first baby within a couple of days when he died. That changed my life profoundly, and what I knew I needed, but at that time it didn't exist. This is almost 30 years ago. Was postvention care. I instinctually knew what it was, but I didn't know what it was called or how to find it. We didn't have the technology and smartphones and Google the way that we have today. But why I'm proud to be a part of offering that now in the work that we do with TAPS. So We do, as a nonprofit, we are there to help all of those who are grieving the death of anybody who has served in the military. Of course, all causes of death, and we support all relationships and all eras and all branches of service. So I oversee specifically those who have had losses to suicide and the postvention care that we offer, which are, the services and the support, the outreach, and the interventions that are done after a suicide death has occurred. In our case, after a death has occurred, but a lot of that also is rooted in prevention. And so, in the work that we have done, we've developed this program since around 2008. So for about 15 years, we have been developing a best practice model, our TAP suicide postvention model, which, we've been very honored where that's been incorporated through, the VA, the DOD, and many postvention programs that now, I'm thrilled to see that are developing and growing, and we are addressing postvention as a critical part or critical component when we talk about suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention. As you mentioned, the number of those who are exposed by a suicide, it could also be much larger than that depending on how suicide is reported. But what we're looking at there is not just the immediate family members or the next of kin. That so oftentimes we think about, the parents, the spouse, the children, the immediate family members, but everybody else who could have been impacted. So that could have been battle buddies and, military colleagues, co-workers, barrack members, roommates, friends, and all of those who have been impacted by that suicide who ultimately could be needing postvention care. We know that this is a population that can be at elevated risk for suicide themselves, particularly if they're not offered and given quality postvention care. So it really is critical that we get to those individuals as soon as possible, sometimes the hours within the death, days within weeks, to make sure that they're getting connected to support, to peer support, to professional resources if they're needing that for counseling or trauma-informed care, and other services that can help stabilize them in their loss. So in that time, in about the past 15 years, as I mentioned, we developed our model of postvention care as survivors of loss for survivors. At TAPS, the majority of us are survivors of loss, as well as some service members and military family members who work with us as colleagues. And by the way, I wanted to mention that I do have my colleague on here. She's not on camera right now, but Cheree Jones is also with me at TAPS. She's going to be joining us in the breakout rooms when we talk about postvention care. And she is a surviving mother and oversees our survivor care team that does outreach with our survivors, usually within the first 18 to 24 months after a loss. We, as I mentioned, our postvention model that we developed, we look at 3 elements around postvention. The first piece that's really the most critical is the stabilization, that we want to try to help survivors immediately stabilize the most critical concerns that they might be dealing with around the loss. We want to make sure we're looking at safety, if there's anybody else who could potentially be at risk or vulnerable for suicide, if they're needing support around their trauma exposure, referrals for counseling, and then some of the specifics that might be unique to their case, whether it be talking to children about the suicide, understanding more about the complexity of this and how this could have happened to their loved one, and some of the specifics, whether it be navigating benefits and, arranging for funeral and burial services, and how to talk to their family members, and battling stigma, and some of the things that oftentimes happen after a suicide loss. So I will say also, we have our 14th annual Suicide Survivor Seminar that we are very proud that we offer, every year for military survivors of suicide loss. If people would like to learn more about that, I'll put the link in the chat. That's coming up next month in October. And we welcome all of those in the military and veteran and military family community to participate, whether in person or virtually online, if you can't make it to our in-person event. But by the work that we do, and mentioning all of you here and Stop Soldier Suicide and America's Warrior Partnership, we have found that the most effective way to treat some of these topics and address this really is through the collaborative efforts and the partnerships that we have formed. You know, we have over 100,000 survivors in our database, but they have different needs, as we've already talked about here. Many times they want to do more with prevention. They want to do things in the memory of their loved one and turn their grief into action. So that might be wanting to do an interview around maybe something for a psychological autopsy, or lending their story towards efforts that could be geared towards prevention, or perhaps it might be loaning a device to organizations like Stop Soldier Suicide. So we try our very best to collaborate with community partners. You know, it's not a competition. We all do very unique things, but I have found, I think we all have agreed, that we can do so much more when we can share our resources together and partner around that, and then refer back to one another depending on what that survivor or that individual might be needing. And we have found that peer-based connection around what we do at TAPS, combined with clinical care if and when that's needed through resources and referrals for counseling, and then the collaborative efforts where they can connect into the community of other survivors and other organizations, is just instrumental in helping them in their grief journey, you know, in the weeks, months, and years to come. I'll turn it back to you.
And that's great, Carla. Thank you so much. And and the more that I've been working, you know, kind of in this space, the more I start to feel that you can't have postvention without prevention, and you can't have prevention without postvention, you know, and that they really are, they're not, you know, necessarily two different entities. They're combined is where the power play piece is. I've heard a lot of you, like when you're talking, you keep bringing up the term community. And for those of you who have heard me talk about Operation Deep Dive, and, you know, it's time that we stop shouldering the mental health just on our social workers, psychiatrists, psychologists, you know, the mental health community, that really, in order to really holistically look at what's going on with persons in our communities, is to have a more community wrap around and what that looks like. And you've heard TAPS talk about, and you've heard Stop Soldier Suicide bring up the term community, and, you know, America's Warrior Partnership does community integration. So, I mean, let's talk community. Let's talk about what does it look like for a community to support the veterans? What have you guys been seeing, or what does that look like? What have you seen that works?
Cheree, I'll start off by saying, generically, a rising tide lifts all boats, right? Like, each one of us can try to do good in our space. You know, we could try to do, you know, a good job at prevention, and Carla could try to do a good job at postvention, but it's really combining our efforts, you know, because so many veterans are driven by trust. And this is just my personal opinion, just being a veteran myself. I'm driven by trust. I know a lot of my friends, my peers are driven by trust. And us as individual organizations, it's impossible to meet all 22 million veterans where they are. You know, SSS can meet, you know, 500,000 here. TAPS can meet a couple million there. AWP can make a couple million there. But it's about the trust that we build with our clients. It's the trust that TAPS builds with theirs, and same with AWP. That together, if we're working together, you know, for SSS to make a referral and say, hey, we believe, you know, now that you have our trust, we believe that TAPS would be a good solution for you. And having that conversation is just so much easier because we have that built-in trust, that to do that handoff to TAPS, or if we don't have a device and Jennifer says, hey, why don't you check out Operation Deep Dive, because they're doing this other really great work that's very similar to uncover the details leading up to suicide. So it's having that trust, and then as a group, and not, you know, trying to hoard, you know, hoard all the glory. You know, I heard someone say recently that, you know, we're fiduciaries. We have to be only caring about the veterans and their families. And that ultimately is what we are looking out for. So together, I think we're much better suited to make more of an impact across the community.
I just want to elaborate a little bit on what Chuck said, because I agree wholeheartedly that the trust is critical for that foundation. We find that even within our model, the stabilization piece, that it really is about trying to stabilize, so to speak, a foundation that's built on trust and rapport has to be safe, particularly if we're looking at those who've been impacted by suicide, exposed to suicide, had a suicide loss, or attempt survivors. That trust is imperative, and also that we have a responsibility that we are operating among best practices within our field, and that we vet the resources that we are sharing and referring survivors to. So the trust that we have is amongst each other. We need to, as we work with other organizations, we want to help each other to grow, to make sure that they're building their programs around trauma-informed care and best practices, so that when, as Chuck said, when we go to refer somebody, we can tell a survivor, we trust this organization. We worked with them. We would, go there ourselves. We would send our own family members there. This is safe. And if we had that relationship with them, you can too. And that goes a long way when you've been dealing with people that have been impacted closely, because their sense of trust and safety many times has been compromised, unfortunately, given what they've been through. So it's even more important that we really raise the bar on that and set the example, so that when we tell them this is a safe and trusted environment, they're trusting in us and we're trusting in one another here. So I think it's just it enforces the power of the collaborative efforts that we all make together.
When we first started Operation Deep Dive, we defined community as a geographical location. We said in order to be interviewed around the loss of a loved one, you had to live in the same geographical location as that individual was living in when they died by suicide or non-natural causes of death. That started right about COVID. And then when we experienced COVID, it was like a light bulb went off. And I don't know why we didn't think of this, but community is defined way larger than a geographic location. And in fact, and we saw this even building more and more around COVID, where the communities started to be like, Zooms with your friends that didn't live there, and you were doing it like once a week, or, FaceTime and multiple chats where you have multiple individuals on there, and you're always, so community started to really be more pronounced, as it doesn't necessarily have to be a geographical location. So Jennifer, I want to ask you this question around Operation Black Box. How are you guys defining community, and are you seeing anything with just some of your kind of preliminary look around community and community strengths or gaps that you may have started to notice?
Yeah, thanks. I was just reading the chats and was looking at the peer-to-peer support. And I think when we're talking about community, that's so important, is having that peer-to-peer support. And that's kind of what I have been seeing with Black Box, is just this need of connection. The families just really wanting to connect. And I know TAPS is so great at facilitating that connection, and then coming to lend us their device for Black Box. We're taking it another step where, now they're doing something with their loved one's device. And so now that's forming even another, tight community. And so we've created like a private Facebook page for our families of Black Box, where they can join and just share about their loved ones, but also share about their why, like why are they wanting to lend us their device, and what are they hoping, to accomplish by helping us with our mission, and just really supporting each other, which I think is a beautiful thing. And just to go back on your previous question, I think the same thing with all of us and our organizations, just supporting each other. It's, we all have a piece of the puzzle. And so I think if we're really going to put it all together and to figure this out, then we have to work together. I just think it's not a we want to, I think it's a have to now.
Yeah, I want to add on to what you and Carla were saying that you've seen in some of your data as well. We do an annual survey every year, and what we've seen throughout the years is like top two things associated with a person's level of hope, or a veteran or family member's level of hope, are purposeful activities and giving back. So volunteerism and purposeful activities. And so that really touches in on the connection piece that you guys are talking about. So let's talk about connection a little bit. We've talked about trust. We've talked about community. How have you guys been able to connect with the populations that you're working with in order to start that relationship that you have with them?
So I guess I'll go first again. So even though we're a nonprofit, our marketing and development side works very much like a for-profit. So going back to the notion of 22 million veterans across the US, as a nonprofit, we can't fiscally meet all 22 million veterans where they are. We literally cannot buy enough marketing to where they are. So what we've learned, so based off a CDC report from, I think it was 2016 or 2017, that identified that 33% of veteran suicides happen in 3% of the counties within the 16 states that they studied. So that gave us a little bit of insight that there are pockets of where veterans live, and there are pockets of where veterans are dying by suicide. And granted, this was only a 16-state study, but it just reinforced the notion that there are areas where veterans tend to congregate. So if you look at our disposition for our clients, are North Carolina as an example, is around Fayetteville, which makes sense. There's Fort Bragg, there's Charlotte, Raleigh, Durham, and some Greenville in Greensboro, excuse me. And that kind of makes sense just from a population standpoint, for population density, and then vicinity of military bases. So we've really tried to hone in using geofence advertising and Facebook and Google Analytics to really find where the veterans are, and to most effectively use our marketing dollars to be able to refine more details, more and more details that we can, to kind of put back into the top of the marketing funnel to figure out where they are, where they're living, what they're doing, and to focus in on those organizations and those groups and those locations. So it was one of the parts that I thought was really neat coming into this, because this is my first. It's not my first job outside of the military, but it was my first job that had like this dedicated marketing arm, and it was neat to see how they could leverage some of the technology from a for-profit perspective to really acquire some of the highest risk veterans out there.
Can I add to? Another thing that Stop Soldier Suicide is doing is our Facebook challenges. And I have seen such an amazing connection there, where people join to do like 100-mile challenge. That's one of the ones we're doing this month for suicide prevention. And, they get on the Facebook page, and a lot of them are veterans, service members. There's a couple on there right now that are active duty, and they're participating in this challenge, and they're posting daily, like they're overseas and posting pictures of them running overseas, and then the comments and the support that they're getting, just the encouragement of like, oh, this is so great. Thank you for your service. Thank you for, putting in the miles today. And just really being able to look at those comments and, the posts in those challenges, it amazes me how supportive everyone is, especially in this world of social media where, it can be kind of a tricky thing. I go on there and it's just amazing. Everyone is so encouraging, so supportive, and just really wanting to be there for each other. And I've seen service members and veterans put in there, like, you know, reach out to me if you need somebody to talk to. Here's my number, call me. And just really building that connection with each other.
Carla, how do you guys connect?
Wow. Quite a few different ways. A lot of it really depends on sometimes the duty status of the individual who has died. We do have memorandums of understanding with the different casualty departments where we will get lists if survivors sign a consent form where we can follow up with them. So we have some internal ways of doing that. We, in the military community, I think between our reputation and word of mouth, you know, a lot of people might come from outside referrals, from the DOD, from the VA, from other survivors within the military community. It just really depends on each circumstance, I would say. You know, we, between social media platforms and having a presence out there, you know, it also depends, I think, on the survivor. You know, depends. Some people want to connect right away and they're really kind of hungry and they want the support. They don't want to feel isolated. Sometimes they might not be ready for it. So we also follow their lead around that. We want them to know whenever they're ready, we will be here. And if it's not for a year or 5 years, or, you know, sometimes it could be a very long time until they are ready to pick up that phone call, but we will stand ready. We don't, you know, there's no statute of limitations per se, you know, there's no criteria of when the loss was, when they can come to us. So even if it's, you know, been 10 years and there is a survivor, unfortunately it happens, you know, from time to time, if they've been out in kind of struggling alone in isolation because maybe they didn't know we existed, that it's never too late and we can kind of get them into our programs and get them some support. We want them to know that they're not alone. They don't have to go through this by themselves. There are those of us who have been down this road. There are programs now and services that exist that never existed before. It doesn't take away the pain of their loss, but it can be a great comfort to know they're not the only ones, that, you know, they don't have to do this by themselves. You know, we have a lot of resources that we've created over the years to get into the hands of survivors. So if there's a loss, we, you know, mail them out a care package in the form of a resource kit that is kind of catered around their needs and their family. You know, we have a staff, Cheree, my colleague who's on the call, who oversees our survivor care team staff. Once a survivor is in our database, we will start outreach with them, direct outreach, whatever way they prefer, if that's text, phone call, email. And if they're not ready, you know, they don't ever have to pick up the phone. We might keep trying, you know, sometimes they'll say it was 3 years, but I finally decided to answer that email from you all, and that's okay. So we have, you know, staff that can do long-term outreach to just assess for their needs. And along the way, we learn a lot about what those needs might be. You know, if they're needing professional care, if they want to get involved in other organizations, if they do have, say, a device that they want to donate, we could say, you know what, we have a partnership with a great organization that you might want to learn more about. So as we get to know them, and again, you know, they trust us, they share about a very personal, intimate details around some of the most tragic moments and times in their life. And so, you know, we look at it as a great responsibility to be trusted with that, but also we want to share these resources with them. So when they come to us and whatever their needs may be, it might be something internal that we have within our organization, but it might be getting them connected with external partners and organizations that could be really vital to their healing. So it really is, you know, just enforces this concept about the collaboration, the partnership, that it's no one responsibility. It's all of us connected. It's not, as many people have said in the chat, this is not just specific to mental health. This isn't about, you know, just clinical care. It is the collaboration between peer support and organizations and the different levels of needs to meet those who've been impacted, I think, individually based on what might be most helpful in their journey, which, you know, it's going to be it's a process, right? So that changes. Sometimes in the very beginning, what they needed might be very different in 6 months, 12 months, a year down the road. And there might come a time when they've changed their mind and now they do maybe want to participate in an interview or maybe donate a device. So we have the ability to kind of follow them long term, and they can come back whenever they need. We don't close out a case, so to speak. So we really are there for the long term throughout the life cycle, so to speak, of our family members as their needs change, as their children get older and maybe go into different developmental stages. The needs of that family might change. So then as those needs change, it's really helpful to know what else exists out there so we can get them connected to the other programs if that's what they're looking for.
Well, connection is the key. And just to wrap up, connecting with we all have different programs that we're offering, and they're all like specific to something that may be going on with a veteran or family member or caregiver or spouse at that time. But if we're not connecting with them in a relational manner, which you guys have done a phenomenal job talking about how your connection is relational. It's not transactional. It's not one and done. It's not one size fits all. We're all looking at the, one size fits one. We're going to make a connection. We're going to build a relationship, and then we're going to leverage the resources that maybe our own organizations have, as well as other organizations in your community that we can make sure that you're already supported with. And I think you guys did a phenomenal job of explaining and talking through that. Allison, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Cheree. So we are going to go for the next 25 minutes into breakout groups. Hopefully you've thought about which ones you would like to be in. So the topic 1 is Postvention for Survivor. That's going to be led by Carla. Topic 2 is Suicide Prevention, led by Chuck. Topic 3 is Post-Traumatic Growth, led by Jennifer. Topic 4 is Overcoming Stigma by Cheree. And we also have a guest person, Ramya, who's going to do the DoD for transitioning veterans. So thank you to her for joining us today and helping us with our breakout, because we have a large group of people. So I'm going to go ahead and open all the rooms. If you need help, just stay on and I'll give you a hand. Welcome back, everybody. There we are. There is everybody. Very good. So I'm going to start. We're going to look at key takeaways from our breakout groups. So our first group for Postvention Survivor, Carla, do you have, can you give us a short key takeaway, or do you have someone you want to appoint to give us a key takeaway?
We talked a lot about elaborating more on some of our resources, how to get people connected to us at TAPS. We have our survivor helpline. They can self-refer on the website. You can do that on their behalf. We talked about a lot of the free trainings that we offer that are archived on our website. So I put a lot of those links in the chat. So for follow-up, if people are wanting resources, training opportunities, just wanting to learn more about either connecting people or maybe consultation around what can help with program development, we're here to support whatever needs you might have.
Perfect. Thank you. And I'll make sure that gets out in the after action. All right, Chuck, the next group was suicide prevention. Do you have a key takeaway from yours, or do you want to point somebody to share?
I unfortunately did most of the talking. I'm not the suicide prevention expert. Keith Hoddle's our chief program officer, and I was hoping he'd be able to speak to that today. So I spoke a little bit about the Stop Soldier Suicide model, and then what kind of a typical client journey would look like. We had a good discussion on the referral pathways for between partner organizations to stop soldier suicide. The fact that there's we're available 24/7, be it through a crisis line or a web form submittal, and then kind of the process for like where I really step in is like from a partnership perspective, like how do we make that referral process as easy as possible? So there's just minimal keystrokes, minimal people involved, and just to make the process as easy as possible. And then there was some good discussion about some of the things that surprised me. I wasn't a mental health educated or expert when I came into this role. I retired from the Army with not much experience, and it was very eye-opening. So talking about some of the risk factors, some of the traumas associated with our clients, whether it be much younger, from childhood trauma to military sexual trauma. There was just a lot that surprised me from our client personas. So we had a good discussion about that, and I think that covered it. Lynn, did I miss anything?
No, this sounds like you had a great, I know everybody had a great conversation because I had trouble getting people back. So let's see. Post-traumatic growth, Jennifer, really quickly, anybody, do you have a quick sum up of your group?
Yeah, I think we talked about what post-traumatic growth looks like and what has helped us in our healing and what that looked like. And so a couple people shared about working, giving back in the community and just helping others. That seemed to be the theme, is helping other people through their own trials has been significant in their own post-traumatic growth. And then the other key thing that came up was that you don't have to be a family member to be directly impacted by a suicide loss, that there's other ways that you can be impacted, and then what that healing process looks like when you're not a family member, but you still have to deal with the trauma of what you have been through and what you have seen.
Thank you. So let's see. The next group was Overcoming Stigma with Cheree. Quickly sum up.
So I took notes for Cheree's group. And we talked about how the stigma surrounding suicide really kind of originates from a religious perspective, and that oftentimes it's viewed as a crime, and the wording committing suicide really kind of makes, which it is a crime a lot of places, like it's actually like legislation that it's like a crime. So just changing like the wording and being cognizant of that. And we talked about how we see a lot of clinicians are uncomfortable treating people who are actively expressing suicidal ideations, and so kind of starting at that like clinical side of things, that healthcare perspective will help break down some barriers. And then, not talking about or suppressing the feelings that you might be having when someone, and kind of just not at all approaching the subject of, my loved one died by suicide, and just not talking about what the cause of death is, can kind of put people at a higher risk for actually also contemplating, attempting suicide. And so kind of it all just wraps up with like, we need to be talking about it more and not approach it with like kid gloves in mind.
Thank you. Thank you. Melissa, real quickly, what is your group? Thank you for stepping in for Ramya.
So I was fortunate enough to be able to be here today for our fearless leader, Ramya Sundararaman. So we discussed some of the existing resources, both for service members and families, for active duty and the reserve components, as well as some of the collaborative work we're doing with the VA. That led to some great discussions on what are some resources to help with some of those challenges of working either through the system as active duty or reserve component, or through the transition process. And we were very, very happy to be able to share information that Military OneSource has staff on call 24/7 to be able to speak directly with that service member or family member or veteran to be able to identify where they're at in their journey. And because of that, what resources are available to them to help through that, navigating that difficult passage there. And then in addition, we discussed some of the collaboration going on moving forward between other federal agencies like Department of Labor, Department of Energy, as well as accessing education resources, disability resources. So how it's so vital that all of these agencies collaborate, not only amongst themselves, but amongst the community resources, both government resources and the very, very important work of our VSOs to be able to prevent reinventing the wheel and also to support and share the resources that exist out there.
Thank you, Melissa. Jeanette, pass it to you to close it up for us. Guys, thank you for being here. Go ahead, Jeanette.
All right, so we'd like to thank Charles, Jennifer, Carla, and Cheree again for their very informative panel. We'd also like to thank Melissa and Keith for assisting with the breakouts. I'd like to let you all know about and invite you to attend our symposium this year. We're going to have it in October from the 4th to the 6th in Atlanta. It is an in-person event, but we also have a virtual component for those that cannot be there in person. So please check that out and be there with us. It'll be a great time. Our next Battle Rhythm will take place on November 7th, 2022. Our focus at that time will be on the best practices surrounding caregiver mental health. So we think that's a really good topic and hope that you'll learn some things there and hope you can attend. In closing, I'd like to thank all of you for collaborating and sharing. America's Warrior Partnership's ultimate goal is to improve the quality of life for all veterans and end veteran suicide by empowering local communities to know all their veterans and serve them holistically before a crisis occurs. America's Warrior Partnership's model, community integration, amplifies local efforts by bringing the community's veteran-serving organizations together to bridge the gaps in available services by connecting local groups to national resources. We believe communities are best equipped to improve the quality of life for veterans. We hope that today's Battle Rhythm provided you with powerful insights, best practices, new partners, and tools to do just that. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you all in November. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa.